In this first video, we'll talk about the Rhino interface. If you wouldn't mind being patient, this will be one of the longer videos that we'll go through. So just to orient of what we're looking at here in Rhino, we'll divide this screen into a few different sections and go through each one to give an idea of what's located where within Rhino. You may be working on a different style of computer like a Mac, and so you'd have a different version there. Or if you're working on a newer version of Rhino, I'm in Rhino 5, and so things might have shifted just slightly. So if you do have any questions for where to find something or you're not seeing it, that'll be a nice thing to be able to chime in with me or share your screen via Zoom so I can help you see where something might be located that you can't find. One of the main things we want to work with in Rhino is our four-screen view. So we have our top view, our perspective view, our front view, and our right view, respectively. If we're only working two-dimensionally, for instance, we're designing something that we want to print out or laser cut at some point, then in that case, we want to work only on our XY plane. And so that would be what's in our top view. So if you look down in the bottom left corner of each of these four screens, you'll see that they've got a listing of the Cartesian coordinates that you're looking at. So in this first top view here, we've got Y and X. In our perspective, we've got X, Y, and Z. So we're looking three-dimensionally in our perspective space. And then in the bottom row on our front and our right, we've got our Z 2D views for Z and X and Z and Y. So for getting us started, we won't need anything other than our top view. So if I wanted to enlarge that view, I could find the name top here in this little left-hand corner, and I can double click on that, and that will enlarge my top view. That takes away a little bit of the visual clutter of everything that we're looking at here, and it also eliminates me accidentally drawing in a scene that I didn't want something. So for now, we'll stick to top view. Some of the other things that are important to use in Rhino are going to be in our very top menu up here. So in most softwares, we're familiar with a file, edit, and view prompt. New things in Rhino will be things like our curve menu. And then we've also got after that surface, solid, and mesh. Those are the various types of geometry and modeling forms that Rhino will use. And curve is what we'll start out working with. So to explain just a little bit of what this means in terms of Rhino, curve is any type of line that you're going to do. Even if it's not a straight line, it's still called a curve in Rhino. If it's a closed shape like a square, it will still fall under the purview of a curve. We won't get into surfaces, solids, or meshes in this instance. We're going to keep things a little more straightforward, and we'll work with just drawing lines and basic shapes for now. So if I did click on and enlarge my curve menu, I can see that I've got a really wide array of different styles of curve commands. And I call these commands because that's how Rhino refers to any type of input information that we're using to create something, to generate geometry. So we want to get used to kind of hearing the word curve and the word command. Those will be sort of important parts of our Rhino vocabulary. Other things that I may need to do up here in this top menu, I can use my file section, and I can go in and I can save files. So save as. I can go into edit, and I can see a lot of the usual things that we might look for inside of any software we may open up, like copies and paste, deleting, as well as the undo key, which will be Control-Z or Command-Z if you're on a Mac. We always want to know how to undo something. I'm going to drop back down in my curve menu now. And I can see that, again, I've got this long list of what's called commands, and they're going to show me different names of them. And as I highlight, I can see even longer lists of ways of creating these types of geometry within different styles of commands. One of the easiest ways to create is just to go ahead and click on one of those, and then I can start clicking and placing geometry. However, you may have noticed as I started to create that line that this prompt up here in my top menu bar shifted and had an additional amount of text in it. So this line here where it says command is called my command prompt. If you're on Mac, it's probably located right here above the toolkit, but usually somewhere in this upper left-hand area. In terms of using the command line, it will automatically pop up if I use any of the tools in my toolkit or drop down one of my top menu bars here. There's multiple ways of creating geometry in Rhino. So I'll go back in and I'll go to my line command, then I'll go to single line. And we can see that my command line has automatically shifted, and now it's giving me additional options for things that I can do in the creation of my line. We'll come back to those in a later video when we actually start creating geometry, but it's important to note in the beginning that you are always looking back to the command line as you're creating geometry, just in case it's asking something that you might have forgotten as a step along the way. If you get into a command that you don't want to be in, then you can hit on Mac, you'll have a little cancel button here. And on a PC, you can use the escape key in the top left of your keyboard. And so I hit that escape key and it ended that command and brought me back to a blank prompt here. Below the command line on the left-hand side of my screen, if you're on a Mac, you may have it a little widened, such as this. If you're on a PC, it might look closer to mine. Regardless of how it looks, I've got a series of icons here that are the same across both interfaces. If I just hover my mouse over these, I can get helpful names of what's going on in these. And we'll see that, for instance, if I hover over my third command here, I'm getting options for creating lines, and I can even click and hold on this little arrow on the icon, and I can see even more extended ways of creating commands. So this toolkit area will do the same thing as me dropping down my curve menu here, and it'll even go into these surfaces, solids, and meshes. So if you are a more visual person, then maybe the toolkit is an easier way for you to keep track of things. If maybe you're more text or language based, the actual top menu bars might work for you. There's no wrong way to do these, just so long as you sort of remember what's where. Down below my toolkit, down here in the bottom left, I've got some other options that if you're on Mac, again, they may appear over here in the left side, in the bottom left as more of a list. But I've got a series of words that have little checkboxes next to them. So they start out and they go in the same order on both platforms. They start out saying end, near, point, mid, sen, int for intersection, perp for perpendicular, tan for tangent, quad for quadrant, not, vertex, project, and disable. You may have to scroll a little bit if you're on Mac in this area in order to see the very bottom of the list. So I can toggle these on and off just by checking the boxes. And they're called my object snaps. They're really handy for if I'm creating geometry and I want to quickly snap like magnetically on the ends of objects that are already created in Rhino. For instance, as I hover over the ends of this line that I've created, I can see that a little end pops up next to my cursor. Or if I check the mid box and I go to the middle of my line, I can see that, okay, the midpoint snap is toggling and connecting. Sometimes they're really helpful, and other times if you're trying to do things more freeform, they may get in the way. So that's where you may come over here to the end and check disable and temporarily turn them all off. Likewise, if disable is checked from the get-go, you may need to uncheck that in order to use any of them. We'll look back at some specific ones as we start creating more geometry. One of the easier ways to control them also is through these toggle switches that we have down along the bottom of my screen here. And if you're on the Mac, things like grid snap, ortho, planar, O snap, smart track, gumball, and record history, those are all happening in the top center or so of my screen. So you may not see them at the bottom, but the words are still the same. And the way that you use them is also the same in that you click on them and it will toggle these options into place. One of these options in the PC version is for, it says O snap, and that means my object snaps. So as I toggle that switch on and off, I can even see how it grays out my object snaps. Some of the others that are in here that can be helpful are things like grid snap. If I want to take advantage of the grid on my screen, I can turn on grid snap and my cursor will follow along with my grid lines. Again, things like that, if you're wanting to do things more freeform, it can be helpful or hurtful. So you just want to be aware of whether or not you have them on. I tend to leave grid snap off. Ortho will lock things at 90-degree increments for me so that I can no longer move at angles other than 0 or 90. And so if you're doing very perpendicular drawings or regular geometry, that could be a really useful thing to have on. We won't get into planar at this time, and we'll come back to some of the others in here in later videos potentially. But more than anything, you may just want to leave them unchecked right now if you're not sure what they do. So we're sort of making a loop around our screen. And so next on our list of things to look at here will be on the right side of the screen. And this side of the screen, I'll start on the top section over here. So I've got a few tabs that I can open up here and see different icons. And if you are on a Mac version, this is going to look slightly different. Your series of icons you'll have across the top, you'll have a couple similar icons as to what I've got in like layers, your properties, this little rainbow circle that I've got here, that will appear as kind of 2 circles and an icon right next to it. And so I apologize if this gets a little confusing. The main thing we want to be able to do is toggle into the layers and into the properties. And so on a Mac, you probably have a series of icons across both, and you can use the first 2 of those icons in order to get both of these. And if you don't see this at all, it may be because you've got a sidebar option right here that needs to be checked on. Within our layers, if you've worked with layers in Illustrator or Photoshop, they're really similar to how they operate in Rhino. In really early, simple operations, they are not totally necessary. However, as your files get more complex and more nuanced, it does make your life much easier to organize information into separate layers. I think the easiest way to consider them right now is as if you wanted to draw with different colors of pens. For instance, I've got my default layer here that's got a check mark. So that check mark means that it's my current layer. That's what I would be drawing in. If I click right below that check mark in layer 01, I now have highlighted my red layer. And so I'll get a red pen color if I start to draw on that layer. So if I start drawing a line now, it turns up red instead of black, which it was doing before. So I could continue if I wanted to change into different colors here. I could continue down my list of colors and be able to cycle back and forth. If you're doing, again, really simple things, you only need 1 color, the layers may not be as important for you. Other things that I can do in the layers, I can click twice slowly on the name of a layer and rename it. And then click into a different layer. I can also, for instance, I've got this line drawn on my red layer here. As soon as I click into or make current a different layer that's not my red one, so I'll go current on my layer 02, my purple layer, I can use the light bulb next to the red layer and hide geometry. Or I can use the padlock and try and select things in a different layer that's locked, and it won't move them for me. So if I needed to make sure that something of a reference stays in place and doesn't get messed up, I can use either I can hide it using the light bulb, or I can lock it in place using the padlock. Notice that those options go away when your layer is selected as the current layer. So I can't use the on and off or the lock switch if I'm currently working in my red layer. And the other option that we'll want to have turned on is our properties in the right side of the screen. We'll come back to properties and how that can be important for us. One of the other things that could be helpful over here is if you wanted to toggle on the help window. You can also do that in Mac by using the help command that's the last icon. And I'd suggest toggling between that and your properties in this bottom right screen. So I'm actually going to drag this down and put it here. And what this will do is if I go into a certain command, like I'll go into line, the help window will automatically update. It's even got videos on how to use the commands So it's an incredibly useful area of Rhino. So in case you've got any questions about right away in the moment of what you're doing, you may go down first to the line command and, or I'm sorry, to the help window, and it can help you out in answering some of that. As you can see, there are a lot of other things going on in my Rhino screen here. There's a lot happening with these tabs that if you're in a Mac, you may not have all of that, and that's fine. We won't use any of this. We've also got a considerable number of options up here in these top bars that I didn't touch on. Well, we're not going to work with those a lot for now anyway. So if you're curious, click through things and see what they are, drop something down and see what you can find there. We'll open up a couple more of these as we do different iterations of exercises, but for the most part, what I showed in this video will be the main elements of Rhino that we'll be working with. So thanks for your patience in sitting through this one. Again, this will be one of the longer videos, and try to keep in mind that you can come back and reference this if it's not expected that you'll remember all of these things perfectly the first couple times you're working in Rhino. So feel free to open this video back up, and you can kind of scroll to different timestamps in it and find. Just remember that we went around in a sort of counterclockwise circle.